Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. Could I start with you, please, Mr. Lynch? Coming from the perspective that I fully accept and respect that your job is to stand up for your members, to get what you believe to be a better deal for them. Of the multiple days of strike action that have taken place so far this year, and that there's clearly potential for many more to come, what's your assessment of how much money your members have lost through strike days?
Well, it depends what they earn, and it depends whether they're on strike every day. We haven't got a ready-made figure, but they do lose their wages for every day that they're out on strike, and it depends on what shift they're on, how long that shift was, and what rate they're on. What I do know is that the government is subsidising those strikes. We think £30 million. Every time there's a strike, the taxpayer has to pay those companies £30 million. So there's no incentive for these companies. They've got no capital at risk. They suffer no loss. And instead, the DfT and the Treasury pays them to conduct this campaign of aggressive action against our members, to cut their jobs and freeze their pay and rip up their terms and conditions. So the greater scandal is how much money the government is transferring to these private companies in lieu of the revenue that's being lost. So that's why we believe that they're taking so long to come up with proposals.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, but I'd really like to focus on the human beings that work on the railways, them as individuals that want, and you, I think I've got a quote from you from last June, that the British worker needs a pay rise and job security. Well, fundamentally in these times I agree that pay rises and job security are fundamentally good things. But to go through a process by which there are now so many days of strikes, I think I would like to try and understand a little bit deeper, putting aside the points you made about subsidy to train operators, how much money those individual human beings are now down this year on average, or maybe segment them down into different job types as a result of strike action.
I haven't got a figure because it depends what you do. It depends what job you've got, how many days you work, whether the strikes are on the day that you are rostered on. So I haven't got a number for you. If you expected me to turn up, perhaps we could have calculated that in advance. But it will be a lot of money if you've been hit by the dates that we're on. But what we do know is that our members are fully committed to the action, because they don't want their conditions ripped up that we've negotiated with these companies and their predecessors. And of course, you can only get a pay rise if you've got a job, and Network Rail and the train operating companies are proposing thousands of redundancies. And at the same time, as you've just heard, they cannot run the railway without vast amounts of overtime. And the previous Secretary of State said he was going to ban overtime on the railway, which just is an illustration of the incompetence and lack of knowledge that is at the heart of what the DfT does. Because as soon as people don't want to do overtime, the railway collapses. So what we need is a proper agreement. We need the right number of staff. We need the right number of people in training, so that there's a supply train of qualified staff coming through. And we haven't got that because these companies are only in it for the money they can get, not for the service that they can provide for our people.
Thank you for that answer. Can I just delve into this point about job security? That is very important to me. There are many constituents of mine that work on the railways and many other sectors. And job security is vitally important. We've seen through the pandemic massive change in rail use. Clearly in the pandemic people weren't travelling, and as we've come out of it, patterns have changed significantly. I've seen analysis that suggests that whilst the overall numbers are broadly back up, people are travelling at very different times and for different purposes, and some analysis suggests that that's leaving a roughly £2 billion hole in finances.
It was a £2 billion reduction in government funding.
We can look
That's
at it.
What's happened.
We can look at it whichever way, but with people aren't buying the peak time tickets as much, and they're travelling on the cheaper off-peak tickets and weekend tickets, that has an impact on the bottom line. I've seen some analysis that suggests that's around 2 billion.
It hasn't affected the bottom line because they've continued to make profit due to subsidy.
Well, we can come
so
on
it hasn't
this.
affected the bottom line of the companies
come on
at
to
all.
The profit point later, but I just want to look at this point that if the railways are bluntly to survive, they need people buying tickets to travel on them, the way people are choosing to buy those tickets and to travel does appear to be changing, either through home working, either through more weekend travel, leisure travel rather than work travel. Does the RMT accept that in order to secure everybody's jobs within the railways, something does need to fundamentally change in terms of making the railways attractive to people to buy tickets again, and having uncertainty over whether the train will be running in the first place is equally driving people away from the railways and back into their cars or coaches or whatever it may be?
I think you're absolutely right. The railway does need fundamental change, but it's not the one that the railway companies are seeking. We need a railway that runs in the interest of the people, in the interest of the economy and the environment, not in the interests of First Group and others who are subject to private equity takeovers because they're so attractive. The changes they wish to make to strip out wages and conditions are so that they can make increased profits going forward, and they're doing that at the behest of the Secretary of State and the previous incumbent in that job on an ideological basis. So what we need is lower fares. We need an incentivisation for people to get out of their cars and onto the railway. They won't do that with the current fare structure and the current industry structure, and they won't do that with the industry structure that's proposed under the Shapps White Paper for Great British Rail, because you'll keep the corrupt system of railway privatisation where there is no risk, where these people have got a one-way ticket to profit, as you've just heard, where even if they score 0 on customer satisfaction and are unable to run the trains at all when there's no industrial action because they've declared war on the staff and on the passenger, they will make profit no matter what happens, because that's the structure that's been put in place. So we need fundamental change, yes, but you don't need to attack the staff.
What do you believe was the average profit margin for a railway operator pre-pandemic?
It's quite low, but there's no risk. There's no risk to them at the moment.
Do you accept the 2% figure?
Probably 2%, but if there's billions of pounds in circulation, that is quite a comfortable living. If I was getting 2% of all railway income, I'd be doing quite well. And so normally businesses have to put capital at risk, don't they? Yeah. That's why they justify their profit. Well, this is a cartel of people that are working with the government to produce surpluses at no risk to themselves. Yeah. And no matter what their reputation is in this industry, the government will keep paying them. That is ridiculous, and I might put it, a corrupt system, because there's no incentive for them to make any change. The TOCs have taken £3.5 billion worth of profit out of the railway since privatisation. They haven't done anything for us because they've got no risk. And when they've had risk, they've handed back the keys.
Mr. Lynch, I would like to get into this profit point, because I think these figures are disputed. I've seen things from your union that talks about £500-600 million profits, and yet there is equally data out there that suggests since privatisation, as you've raised it, that passenger numbers in fact doubled on the railways and have reduced roughly a £2 billion annual operating loss. And some of your figures don't seem to take into account the rolling stock costs and the supply chain.
They do, costs. And the rolling stock companies are making vast profits. Last year, when there were virtually no passengers, they made £150 million worth of profit.
We will disagree on whether profit is a good or a bad thing, I'm
Profit's
sure.
okay,
however,
the return of risk. Though.
I'm trying to understand, for the evidence base of this select committee, where the real profit is, because there is a lot of analysis out there that suggests the real operating profits of the railways is likely to be post-pandemic somewhere between 100 and 150 million pounds. Now, I'm sure we'll agree that that is a lot of money, but that translates to about a 2% pay rise for 1 year, not the sort of numbers that we're talking about. So,
well, how does it translate to a pay rise? They could make the pay rises without getting rid of their profits. And you've got to ask the question, why are they in this business at all to make profit? We don't need private rail operating companies. We've got with LNER and several other operators who couldn't cope. We don't need the incentive of private companies.
Understand, you just said that they could make pay rises without impacting their profits. So where else is the money going to come from?
It doesn't necessarily wipe out all of their profit, but I would be very happy if we had no private sector rail operators and we could pay the staff a proper wage.
Okay, my last question, and I'd be grateful for a brief answer to give others a chance to answer it. What will you accept in terms of change on the railway, either through greater automation or technology coming in to ensure that costs can be reduced on other things other than what we pay the human beings that work on the railways in order to secure job security?
Well, we've accepted change constantly in my lifetime on the railway. We've had new technology constantly, whether that's retail of tickets, whether it's the technology on rolling stock, or whether it's the technology on repairing the track. And we are constantly in dialogue with Network Rail about that. What we won't accept is a decline in safety standards, where they're going to cut 50% of the maintenance standard tasks, where they want to make our people work permanent nights, which we think endangers them, and they want to make our people have a work-life balance that is entirely unacceptable. So what we will accept is a negotiated change and an evolution of the railway. We won't accept a massive imposition where they will require us to work overtime constantly because there aren't enough people there anymore, and where they will sign, for instance, they've just signed a new deal with the private sector infrastructure companies for £13 billion while they're looking to make their own people redundant. So what we will accept is a negotiated change to our agreements, not an imposition.